5 minutes ago, everything changed. A sealed archive, a private vault, untouched for decades, and a document that was never meant to be seen. Prince Edward thought he was reviewing routine estate papers until he saw the discrepancy. A single altered line, a name added, a name removed. And in that moment, the weight of royal secrecy shifted. Because if someone tampered with the Queen Mother's vault access list, what else have they changed? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Prince Edward had not intended to step into controversy. His review of archival security logs was supposed to be procedural, almost ceremonial, an act of stewardship rather than suspicion. For decades, the Queen Mother's private vault had stood as a symbol of continuity, its access tightly guarded, its contents treated as sacred fragments of royal memory. It was more than a storage chamber. It was a vault of influence, of letters never released, of directives whispered about, but never confirmed. Edward understood that better than most. To him, his grandmother's legacy was not political currency. It was personal. It was woven into his childhood, into the quiet advice she once gave about duty and discretion. And now, staring at the access list, he felt something colder than confusion. He felt betrayal. The discrepancy was subtle, almost elegant in its precision. The archived signature bore a faint irregularity, the kind that would escape a casual observer, but not someone familiar with the original records. A name that had never appeared before was now authorized entry, during a narrow window of time, an entry that coincided with a period of quiet tension within the royal household. Even more unsettling was the absence of a trusted historical custodian whose clearance had always been permanent. That removal was not administrative housekeeping, it was strategic. Edward traced the timestamps next. The security logs told a story of movement, of entry and exit, but the recorded times did not align with official schedules. A door opened when no meeting was listed. A digital signature logged during hours when the supposed author was documented elsewhere. At first, he searched for the comforting explanation: clerical oversight, system error, outdated data migration. But the more he cross-referenced, the clearer it became. This wasn't sloppiness. It was deliberate. The edits were clean, controlled, almost respectful in their restraint. Whoever altered the list did not want chaos. They wanted access. When Edward quietly requested a full audit disclosure, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations shortened. Eyes avoided his. Long-serving staff who had weathered public scandals without flinching suddenly grew cautious. It was not outrage he sensed, it was fear. And fear inside palace walls does not grow without cause. As the implications settled, a darker possibility emerged. Access to that vault meant access to narratives that shape legitimacy, letters that clarify succession intent, personal instructions that could influence ceremonial authority. In the wrong hands, such documents could recalibrate power without a single public announcement. Edward understood something chilling in that moment. This was not about curiosity or nostalgia. Someone had benefited from stepping into that vault. Someone had needed their name there, and someone else's erased. And if they were bold enough to alter a list tied to the Queen Mother's final wishes, they were bold enough to alter more than paper, because the vault itself holds secrets far older and far more dangerous than a single altered document. For decades, the Queen Mother's vault was treated as sacred ground. Few knew its contents. Fewer still were permitted entry. Jewelry, handwritten correspondence, sealed directives, some never catalogued publicly. But vaults do not guard only treasures. They guard leverage. They guard truth. And when Prince Edward requested the physical access logs tied to that vault, palace officials hesitated. Because what lies inside may not just rewrite history, it could destabilize it. The vault was never simply a chamber of valuables. It was a quiet pillar of authority. Within its sealed confines rested the Queen Mother's most private intentions, letters drafted in moments of clarity, notes written during periods of uncertainty, instructions prepared for futures she alone anticipated. Over time, those contents gained almost mythical weight inside the palace. They were whispered about in corridors, referenced indirectly in strategic conversations, and treated with a reverence that bordered on fear. Edward had grown up understanding that his grandmother believed in legacy, not just a ceremony, but a structure. What she placed in that vault carried purpose. Access to it was governed by rules so rigid they were rarely questioned. Authorization required layered approval, signatures cross-verified by senior household officers, entries logged both digitally and manually. Historically, only a narrow circle of trusted custodians and direct heirs had been granted clearance. Their names appeared consistently year after year, forming a stable pattern that signaled continuity. That pattern is what Edward relied on when he began comparing past records to the most recent list, and that is why the disruption unsettled him so deeply. A new name had surfaced without formal ratification, no recorded council discussion, no official endorsement. It appeared almost surgically inserted, as though woven into the fabric of the list so seamlessly that it might escape notice. But Edward was not glancing casually. He was studying every stroke, and what disturbed him more than the addition was the removal. A long-standing custodian, someone whose loyalty had been unquestioned for decades, was gone from the authorization record. Not suspended, not retired, simply erased. The palace archivists, veterans of royal transitions and private storms, reacted in ways that confirmed his unease. Conversations lowered in volume when he entered. Documents were produced, slowly, reluctantly, as if each page carried risk. Whispers drifted through administrative offices, subtle but persistent. Some suggested procedural updates, others hinted at modernization. Yet none could explain the absence of proper ratification. None could account for why such a sensitive adjustment bypassed customary review. Edward sensed resistance not only from staff, but from unexpected quarters within the family itself. Polite assurances were offered, emphasizing stability and discretion. He was advised to avoid unnecessary disturbance. But beneath those words lay an unspoken caution: do not pull this thread. And the more he was urged toward calm, the more certain he became that the vault contained more than heirlooms and sentiment. There were likely directives sealed within inheritance clarifications, ceremonial guidance, perhaps even contingency plans designed to shape influence beyond the Queen Mother's lifetime. If those documents existed, access to them would be invaluable. They could strengthen a claim. They could shift perception. They could quietly reframe authority without public declaration. And that realization deepened the weight pressing on Edward's conscience. This was no longer about clerical irregularity. It was about intention. It was about who sought proximity to legacy and why. And as Edward traced the altered names, one connection began to surface, one that no one expected him to pursue. It wasn't just an extra name. It was that name, a figure already surrounded by quiet controversy, someone with proximity, influence, motive. When Edward compared archived lists from previous years, the difference was undeniable. The alteration wasn't random, it was surgical. Precision implies planning, and planning implies purpose. The question is no longer whether the list was changed. The question is why, and for whom. Edward studied the altered entry with a calm that masked the storm rising beneath him. The handwriting matched the official style. The authorization code appeared legitimate. Even the formatting aligned perfectly with previous documents. Whoever made the change understood the system intimately. They knew which boxes to check, which initials to mimic, which procedural language would pass unnoticed. It was not reckless tampering. It was careful insertion, a quiet infiltration wrapped in administrative normalcy. What disturbed him further was the timing. The modification occurred during a period when internal tensions within the royal household had subtly intensified. Strategic meetings had grown more frequent. Conversations about legacy, influence, and ceremonial positioning had surfaced more often behind closed doors. The access change aligned almost precisely with those undercurrents. It was as though someone anticipated a shift and positioned themselves accordingly. That alignment could not be dismissed as coincidence. And then there was the absence. The trusted historical custodian whose name had once appeared as a constant was gone, not reassigned, not retired with honors, simply removed from authorization without explanation. That individual had served faithfully for decades, guarding the Queen Mother's private archives with unwavering discretion. To erase that clearance without formal acknowledgement suggested something deeper than routine rest, rupturing. It suggested displacement, and displacement inside the palace rarely happens without silent negotiation of power. Speculation began to ripple quietly through Edward's thoughts. Was this about access to documents that could influence perception? Could the vault contain directives that subtly clarified succession nuances or ceremonial authority? If so, gaining entry even once would grant someone the opportunity to interpret, prepare, perhaps even reshape how those documents might later be presented. The implications pressed heavily on him. This was no longer an administrative curiosity. It was strategic positioning. But the most painful realization was personal. The name inserted was not distant. It belonged to someone within the extended circle of trust, someone who had stood beside family at formal engagements, who had spoken the language of unity and tradition. To suspect that person felt like betrayal. Edward wrestled with loyalty. He understood the weight of protecting the institution. Yet he also felt the obligation to protect the truth his grandmother had left behind. Her vault was not meant to be a battleground for quiet ambition. He attempted private conversations, gentle inquiries framed as procedural clarification. Each effort was met with polite deflection, smiles that did not reach the eyes, vague references to modernization, and necessary adjustments. No one denied the change outright, but no one offered clarity either. Silence became its own confession. And in that silence, Edward sensed something larger, moving beneath the surface. An unspoken struggle over influence that reached beyond paperwork. The more he considered it, the more one unsettling possibility crystallized. This was about succession perception, not immediate transition, but narrative preparation. Positioning, ensuring proximity to the Queen Mother's final wishes before those whiz could be interpreted publicly. If that was true, the vault was no longer merely a repository of memory. It was a lever that the more Edward investigates, the more he realizes the access list wasn't the first thing quietly rewritten. One change can be dismissed. 2 is coincidence. But 3? That's strategy. As Edward orders a deeper archival review, other inconsistencies surface, small edits buried within years of administrative routine. A refiled directive, a digital record, overwritten. Individually, they mean nothing. Together, they form a pattern. And patterns inside royal institutions rarely emerge without intention. What began as a single irregularity on an access list quickly expanded into something far more calculated. Edward requested a comprehensive metadata sweep of the vault's digital registry, expecting resistance, but not the unease that followed. The timestamps told stories no one wanted to tell. Files modified minutes before internal briefings. Access logs updated during national distractions. Minor annotations adjusted on documents that had long been considered final. On their own, each revision appeared harmless. But aligned chronologically, they clustered around moments of political sensitivity, private discussions about ceremonial roles, estate restructuring, and future public narratives. He laid the dates side by side, mapping them against key internal events. The overlap was undeniable. Adjustments occurred just before strategic decisions were announced, as though someone was quietly recalibrating the historical record in advance. A directive concerning symbolic heirlooms had been reclassified under a different archival code. A personal letter once sealed with the Queen Mother's insignia showed microscopic evidence of being reopened and carefully resealed. Even a digital backup copy bore signs of reformatting, its original version overwritten without explanation. Senior aides, typically composed under scrutiny, struggled to maintain that composure now. Their responses shifted from procedural to protective. Words like streamlining and administrative evolution surfaced repeatedly, yet none addressed the core issue. Why were these modifications happening without transparent authorization? Edward pressed harder, insisting on original hard copies, not scanned reproductions. The request sent ripples through departments accustomed to quiet compliance. Then came the missing footage. Security archives from specific days, aligned with metadata alterations, contained unexplained gaps, not complete deletions, but brief interruptions. In an institution built on meticulous record-keeping, absence carries weight. Edward felt the tension tightening around him. Every question seemed to challenge more than protocol. It challenged trust. He found himself standing at a crossroads between preservation and exposure. The monarchy's stability relies on continuity, on the illusion of seamless tradition. To expose irregularities risked igniting speculation far beyond the palace walls, but to ignore them meant surrendering to a narrative someone else was carefully shaping. The burden pressed heavily. He was not merely reviewing paperwork, he was confronting the possibility of institutional manipulation. And as the scale of revisions unfolded, a more troubling thought surfaced. This did not feel like opportunistic interference. It felt coordinated, subtle adjustments layered over time, edits spaced carefully enough to avoid detection, but deliberate enough to influence interpretation. The vault's history was not being destroyed, it was being refined, polished, redirected. Edward sensed the outline of something larger taking shape behind the curtain of routine administration. The sexist list was only the beginning. The real objective seemed embedded deeper within the archive, waiting to be uncovered. And just as he began to grasp the magnitude of what might be unfolding, a single discovery forced the investigation out of abstraction and into something far more intimate. And then comes the revelation that transforms suspicion into something far more personal. Deep within the vault lies a sealed directive bearing the Queen Mother's personal insignia. It was believed to be untampered, untouched since her passing, but Edward discovers faint evidence of resealing, not broken, not destroyed, just carefully reopened and closed again. What was read, what was copied, and who needed to see it, without leaving a trace? The contents of that directive may hold the answer to everything. The directive had long been described as ceremonial, a final expression of the Queen Mother's structured foresight. Yet those who understood her influence knew better. She did not write casually. Every word she committed to paper carried intention, especially when it involved estates, symbolic heirlooms, and matters of precedence within the royal fold. This particular instruction was rumoured to clarify the stewardship of certain private assets items, not merely valuable in wealth, but powerful in symbolism: titles, jewels, correspondence, ceremonial privileges, the kind of inheritances that shape perception without public decree. When Edward examined the document's casing, his unease deepened. The wax bore her crest, but its edge showed a faint irregularity. To the untrained eye, it appeared intact. To Edward, who had seen countless authentic seals in their original state, something was subtly wrong. The texture was slightly altered. The pressure marks suggested a reopening so delicate it bordered on reverent. This was not vandalism. It was intrusion executed by someone who understood exactly how far they could go without drawing alarm. He felt a tightening in his chest as he considered the implications. The Queen Mother had entrusted these instructions to history, believing they would remain preserved until the appropriate moment. To access them prematurely meant someone sought knowledge ahead of time, perhaps to prepare, perhaps to protect themselves, or perhaps to influence how those instructions might later be interpreted. The difference between reading and acting upon such a directive is thin, and Edward could not ignore the possibility that someone had already crossed it. The directive's language, though restrained, hinted at ceremonial adjustments guidance on the allocation of symbolic roles tied to certain estates and family representations. It was not an explosive declaration, but it carried subtle authority. In royal structures, subtle authority can shift balance quietly. If one branch of the family were granted preferential symbolic stewardship, it could strengthen public perception of legitimacy. It could shape succession optics without altering law. Edward felt the weight of guardianship pressing against his conscience. He had always seen himself as a protector of continuity, not a disruptor. But continuity built on silent alteration is fragile. Staff members, sensing his growing concern, attempted to reassure him. They spoke of routine inspections, archival maintenance, preservation standards, yet none addressed the seal directly. None explained why the directive's casing bore the faint signs of having been disturbed. Their avoidance only amplified his suspicion. A darker fear began to take hold. What if the motive behind accessing the directive was not curiosity, but alignment? What if someone sought to position themselves in accordance with the Queen Mother's final guidance, adjusting narratives before the public ever learned of them? The thought was chilling. It suggested not chaos, but calculation, not rebellion, but refinement of power. Edward realized that if this document had been quietly examined, then the alteration of the vault access list was merely a gateway. The true objective lay in understanding and potentially leveraging the Queen Mother's last written intentions. And if history was being rewritten softly, behind respectful seals and administrative language, the consequences could echo for generations. But if someone accessed the directive, they would have needed authorization from somewhere even higher. Access to the Queen Mother's vault cannot happen in isolation. Every entry requires layered approval, which means if the list was altered, it wasn't done by a lone opportunist. It required protection, influence, silence. Prince Edward now faces a chilling possibility. Someone powerful sanctioned this. And if that's true, exposing it could fracture relationships that hold the monarchy together. The authorization structure surrounding the vault was designed precisely to prevent rogue interference. Clearance flowed upward through a chain of responsibility archival officers, verified documentation, senior household administrators, countersigned requests, and final oversight rested with a select inner circle whose approval carried institutional weight. It was a system built on redundancy. No single individual could simply walk in and rewrite access privileges without leaving visible fingerprints. That reality forced Edward toward a conclusion he had tried to avoid. The alteration must have passed through sanctioned channels. He began reviewing approval hierarchies with a colder lens. Who held oversight during the period when the directive was resealed? Which senior aides possessed authority to authorize special access exceptions? The list narrowed quickly. Not many names carried that power, and fewer still would dare exercise it without anticipating scrutiny. That awareness intensified the stakes. If someone near the apex of the structure had quietly endorsed access, this was no administrative oversight. It was strategic positioning at the highest level. Edward understood what confrontation would mean. The monarchy survives on perception as much as protocol. Public stability rests on the assumption that internal cohesion remains intact. Raising accusations, even privately, risked igniting fissures that could ripple outward. A dispute over archival integrity could quickly evolve into speculation about succession manipulation or internal rivalry. And in a climate already sensitive to shifts in authority, that kind of narrative would not remain contained. He began noticing subtle shifts in loyalty lines. Conversations, once fluid, grew guarded. Certain advisors who had long championed transparency now emphasized discretion above all else. Others, previously distant, offered cautious support but avoided direct alignment. It was as if invisible alliances were recalibrating in real time. Edward felt increasingly isolated, not because he lacked allies, but because he could no longer clearly identify them. Trust, once instinctive, became calculated. Palace communications tightened. Requests for documentation required additional layers of clearance. Meetings were rescheduled or reframed. Language in internal memos shifted toward risk management. The message was subtle but unmistakable: containment. Edward sensed that the institution was bracing not for external scandal, but for internal reckoning. The strategic risk of escalating the investigation grew clearer by the day. If he pressed further, he might uncover definitive proof of high-level authorization, but proof would demand response. Silence would no longer suffice. Someone would have to explain why the Queen Mother's sealed directive had been accessed prematurely. Someone would need to account for the altered list and the missing custodian. And that explanation could alter relationships that had endured decades of shared duty. Yet, retreat was no longer an option. The deeper Edward moved into the vault's history, the more he understood that this was not about personal grievance or procedural error. It was about control over legacy. If powerful figures believed they could quietly adjust access to shape future narratives, then the foundation of trust itself was at risk. The monarchy's strength lies in continuity, but continuity compromised by hidden maneuvering becomes fragile. Edward sensed the pressure building toward an inevitable moment. Questions could not remain suspended forever. The structure that protected the vault was also the structure that would be tested, and the longer the silence stretched, the more volatile the eventual confrontation would become. And that confrontation arrives sooner than anyone expects. Behind closed doors, voices rise, not in public, not for cameras, but in a private chamber where family and institution collide. Edward presents his findings. Silence follows. No denial. No confession. Just tension thick enough to fracture trust built over decades. In that room, the truth hangs unspoken but understood. Edward does not arrive with accusations. He arrives with documents, dates aligned, signatures compared, authorization trails traced to their origin. His tone remains measured, but the gravity of what he lays on the table cannot be softened by politeness. The altered access list, the resealed directive, the missing footage, each discrepancy presented calmly, methodically, like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fits the frame it once belonged to. The reactions unfold in layers. One senior figure responds with controlled composure, questioning whether minor archival adjustments truly warrant escalation. Another leans into defensiveness, suggesting Edward is misinterpreting routine procedural updates. A third remains quiet, their silence heavier than any argument. In royal circles, silence is rarely passive. It signals calculation. It signals awareness. And in that room, Edward senses that more than one person already knew. As the discussion tightens, allegiances reveal themselves not through declarations, but through posture and tone. Certain voices urge discretion above all else. Others frame the situation as a matter of institutional protection, not personal wrongdoing. The language shifts subtly from alteration to maintenance, from tampering to adjustment. It is a reframing strategy, and Edward recognizes it immediately. What he sees as manipulation, others are determined to present as modernization. Then comes the warning. It is delivered calmly, almost kindly. Raising these concerns further, Edward is told, could destabilize narratives carefully maintained for years. The monarchy, they remind him, depends on continuity. Public confidence does not survive internal fractures exposed too hastily. The implication is clear. Pursuing this could do more damage than the alteration itself. Integrity, they suggest, must be balanced against stability. Edward feels the weight of that argument pressing against his conscience. He has spent his life defending the institution, often stepping back to preserve unity. But this is different. This is not about personal pride or ceremonial precedence. It is about whether the Queen Mother's final intentions were quietly accessed and potentially leveraged. To remain silent would protect calm. To press forward would protect truth. The choice is no longer procedural, it is moral. At one point, a carefully chosen phrase enters the conversation. The adjustments were made to prevent future complications. The wording hangs in the air. Complications for whom? The suggestion implies foresight, even necessity, as though altering access and reviewing directives ahead of time was a preemptive act designed to smooth transitions not yet visible to the public. It is framed as prudence. Edward hears it as control. The emotional fracture is subtle but undeniable. Trust, once assumed, now requires evaluation. Family bonds strain under the weight of suspicion. Edward does not shout. He does not threaten. He simply holds his ground, insisting that transparency within the walls must precede stability beyond them. And in doing so, he realizes that the confrontation has already changed something fundamental. Beck vows, the real danger may not lie in what was changed, but in what the vault still contains. Why alter the list, unless the contents of that vault threaten someone's standing? The deeper Edward reflects, the clearer it becomes. This isn't about access, it's about control, about narrative, about shaping the monarchy's future before it unfolds. And inside that vault may sit documents capable of redefining influence, legacy, and hierarchy in ways no one anticipated. The Queen Mother was never careless with her words. Those who knew her understood that she played the long game. If she left directives behind closed steel and wax seals, it was because she foresaw moments like this, moments when clarity would be needed, long after she was gone. Edward begins to consider what might still be hidden within those archives. Private letters clarifying stewardship of estates, instructions regarding symbolic heirlooms tied to public representation, guidance on ceremonial precedents that, while subtle, could elevate one branch of the family over another in perception alone. In monarchies, perception is power, and power rarely shifts loudly. It shifts quietly, through symbols, through proximity, through narrative control. If someone accessed those materials ahead of time, they may not have changed the words, but they could prepare around them, align strategies, anticipate announcements, position themselves to appear favored when the time came. That possibility tightens the stakes beyond family tension. It suggests that influence may already be in motion, calibrated in anticipation of future transitions. Edward understands that if the contents of the vault were ever revealed publicly, even innocently, speculation would explode. Every prior alteration would be scrutinized, every access log re-examined. The monarchy's fragile equilibrium could tilt. But there is another layer, one far more personal. Preserving the Queen Mother's true wishes is not merely procedural for Edward, it is sacred. He remembers her discipline, her unwavering belief that the crown must outlast personal ambition. To think that her final instructions might be quietly leveraged as political currency feels like betrayal not only of protocol, but of memory. He feels caught between two competing loyalties, to the living institution and to the legacy of the woman who helped shape it. The implications for inheritance lines ripple outward in his mind. Not legal succession, those frameworks are rigid but symbolic inheritance. Who carries certain jewels? Who represents specific estates? Who stands in particular ceremonies? These details seem small to outsiders, yet inside royal structure they build narratives over time. They signal endorsement. They hint at alignment. If the vault contains directives influencing those signals, then whoever read them early gains strategic foresight. The crossroads becomes unavoidable. Edward can continue pressing internally, risking fracture and confrontation. Or he can accept assurances, allow the matter to dissolve into administrative language, and preserve outward calm, protect the institution, or protect its integrity. The irony is brutal. Both choices claim to defend the crown, yet only one demands exposure of uncomfortable truths. He senses that the monarchy stands on a narrow ridge, not because of public scandal none has erupted, but because quiet trust has thinned. The vault, once a symbol of stability, now feels like a fault line. What remains unseen within its walls could either reinforce continuity or unravel confidence if mishandled. And somewhere within that archive may still lie a directive not yet examined, a clause not yet considered, a sentence capable of altering everything. Edward realizes that 5 minutes ago, when he noticed that altered Lynn E, he stepped into something larger than archival oversight. He stepped into a silent contest over narrative ownership. The outcome has not yet been decided. The confrontation may only be beginning. And the consequences of what remains hidden may not surface today or tomorrow, but they will surface. Because history has a way of resisting quiet revision. Because 5 minutes ago, Edward didn't just uncover an altered list, he uncovered a question the monarchy may never fully answer. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.